Good morning, everyone. Welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. We are a center dedicated to the teachings of Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who is a Tibetan Kagyu master that came to America in 1970. And we're studying the Profound Treasury Volume 1, which is a compilation of all Rinpoche's seminary talks. Tonight, the topic is mind mixing with space. And John Baker just gave a very beautiful meditation instruction on mind mixing with space. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are four main lineages. One is the Nyingma, which is the oldest school. The next one is the Sakya. Then there's Kagyu, and then Gelugpa. Trungpa Rinpoche was the holder of the Kagyu lineage, but his root guru, Jangmo Khantrul of Sechin, was a Nyingma teacher. So he mixed the Kagyu and Nyingma. And it's a tradition of the Kagyu lineage that meditation is very important. It's key. And many of the Kagyu lineage holders, and just anyone that's in the Kagyu lineage, is encouraged to meditate and go on retreat. And so great meditation masters came from the Kagyu lineage because they spent so many years in retreat. And when Trungpa Rinpoche came to America, there were very few Tibetan teachers here at the time. I know there was a Kala Rinpoche center that I went to when I was living in California, in San Francisco. But many of the teachers didn't emphasize meditation. They would give their students practices to do, maybe Nundro practice. Meditation wasn't that emphasized. But with Trungpa Rinpoche, meditation was first. And if you wanted to be his student, well, you had to learn how to meditate. You had to sit. It was a requirement, especially if you wanted to become a meditation instructor or a teacher. You had to have put in every day a certain amount of meditation and do a month-long datun, which was sitting, and eventually go to seminary and things like that. It was a whole path that was laid out of practice and study. But practice came first and then mixed with study. In this chapter, mind mixing with space, Rinpoche goes further into how to work with ourselves in sitting meditation. In the Kagyu tradition, Rinpoche says, we employ a special practice technique, which is the experience of Chung Ne Dro Sum. Chung means where the thoughts arise, Bei, where the thoughts, or Ne, where the thoughts dwell, and Dro, where the thoughts go. So where the thoughts arise, where they dwell, and then where they go. So it's kind of like a circle. The thoughts arise, they dwell, and then they go. And that's kind of like the way thoughts work, the way that mind works. Thoughts naturally arise, they dwell, and then they go. Those three are accompanied by the practice of Ying Rik Sewa. Ying means space. Rik means consciousness. And sewa means the mixing, so it's the mixing of space and consciousness. Sometimes it's called lung sem sewa, mixing the mind and breathing. The word lung in Tibetan Buddhism, I find it's a very powerful word, because many times when you go to see a Tibetan doctor, they'll say, oh, you have a lung disorder. And that means there's something wrong with your winds, or there's something wrong with your balance, or something like that. and then they'll give you medicine to take with that. So it's very important that all of these things work well. So the winds and the air have to work well in your body in order to be able to practice properly and be healthy. Space, in either case, the idea is to experience space. Everything that Rinpoche taught, I mean, everything, I would say that he emphasized Dharma art, which is something that isn't really taught that much anymore, but we all studied it in the early days. And he gave Dharma art seminars, and there's a book called Dharma Art, which is a compilation of the Dharma art transcripts from the original seminary, which I have the original transcripts, and the book is really good. But basically, he talks about how everything starts in space, like it talks about a blank piece of paper. And in that blank piece of paper, let's say there's a dot, and within that dot, things arise. But without space, nothing is possible because there's no movement. And especially with meditation practice, space is very important. And if we can relate to the space properly, then our practice will flourish. You do not need to deliberately try to mix the mind with the breathing with a solemn effort. Instead, you are simply in contact with the breathing. It is similar to the way that you feel when your body is feeling good. So you don't really have to make an effort to be in space because we're in the space already. It's just there to accommodate us. Then I talk about Dharma art and space. One begins with a blank piece of paper in front of us. That is, you are willing to be open, willing to let go, having a sense of openness and perceptive. You do not need to cultivate it, and you don't need to make anything up. It happens naturally, natural phenomena. The space is here, it's already here, it accommodates us, it accommodates everything that we do in our everyday life. And so we just relax in the space. Space exists around us and it's not demanding anything from us. When we're in the space here, the space doesn't demand anything from us at all. It is a free world. We can relax within that space and trust in space, open, spacious, and relaxed. Open, spacious, and relaxed. Open, spacious, and relaxed. That's the space. In meditation, mindful, Rinpoche talks about mindful, and when I was reading it, I was kind of laughing because now everything is mindful. Everything you hear is mindful. They have a meditation center named Mindful. It's all about mindful. So he is talking about mindful. I'm thinking maybe that's where they got it from. And being mindful of where the thoughts come from, where the thoughts dwell, and where the thoughts vanish. So again, it's where the thoughts come from, where they rest, and where they dwell, where they go. Like a circle. It is not that you are supposed to manufacture a thought and then let it come, let it dwell, and let it go. You have thoughts in any case, and you can just recognize that the function of mind is basically that thoughts arise. And when we try to manipulate or try to stop our thoughts or do anything about it, it just doesn't work. Because it's like saying the sun doesn't come up in the morning. Well, the sun comes up in the morning, just like the nature of the sun is that it comes up and then it goes down. But the nature of the mind is that thoughts arise. And how we work with those thoughts, that's basically up to us. Thoughts come and go. As one thought vanishes, the next thought begins to arise. And by the time the next thought has arisen, the previous thought has already disappeared. You cannot usually experience the vanishing of a thought purely by itself, because to be aware of the thought, you sustain it, so you do not really see anything vanishing. So there's really no awareness of the thought as the next thought comes. I think maybe what Rinpoche was saying here was that if you were really, really like an amazing advanced meditator, you might be able to see how things shift, like in the second, in the moment, how things shift. But for normal people like us, we don't really catch it because it happens so fast. So just know that the thoughts arise, and the reason I'm emphasizing that is because so many times now I hear about how people feel like they want to stop their thoughts, or they don't want thoughts anymore, or when they become a great meditator, thoughts will stop. People are so fixated on the thoughts that they can't relax because they feel like they have to do something about the thoughts. Well, thoughts are just a natural part of the mind. It's like saying, well, you don't want to be a human being, but you have a human body. It's just the way it is. We do not, in meditation practice, we don't judge our thoughts because it's a neutral space. Thoughts arise, whether it's a good thought, as we perceive it to be a good thought, a negative thought, an angry thought. It doesn't matter what the thought is, because in meditation, we don't judge our thoughts. It's a neutral place where anything can happen. Arises in the space, and then it just dissolves in the space. They come and go. And the space can accommodate anything, any thoughts whatsoever. Vanishing of a thought is seen in terms of contrast of another idea coming up, at which the previous thought has already subsided. The arising and dissolving of thought is not exactly simultaneously. The beginning, middle, and end happen very, very fast. So the thought arises, it lingers, and then it dissolves. But it's very quick. They dwell. After you acknowledge them, they drop. Acknowledging the dwelling of a thought does not mean staying with it for a long time, but just experiencing it as your thought is very simple. See, we don't dwell on the thought. Then Rinpoche talks about the 8 kinds of consciousness, and thoughts are the working practice of meditation. So the thoughts are generally connected to one or another of the 8 types of consciousnesses, which are the working practice of meditation. In meditation, you do not exaggerate the different levels of consciousness or disrespect them. You have a balance and a respect. You do not discriminate against thoughts. That's the key. Because when we start emphasizing ourselves and who we think we are, we say our thoughts are this, our thoughts are that, and after a while, it's like all about me. And people, I think it's important to know that when we practice and thoughts arise, everybody's having the same thoughts. The story might be slightly different, but everyone has basically the same type of thoughts. Like for me, when I think, I have a great idea, I always think somebody's probably already thought about that before, because I'm not inventing, any great ideas here. So just know that it is what it is. It's just a thought, and whatever it is. Now, we do not need to judge our thoughts, no matter what they are. One is good, one is bad. Space can accommodate all thoughts. I think it's really important because, some people have tremendous amount of pain and suffering. They really do. More than others, let's say. But that's why practicing is such a relief, because it's a neutral space. Things arise, they they're in the space and then they dissolve. Then Rinpoche says to begin with posture. Begin with a physical well-being. You begin with your posture and your sense of comfort or discomfort. So we take our seat, and the important thing is to keep a strong back, but a soft front. So not rigid. Sense perceptions act as a fuse for your practice. The vision, sounds, sensations, tastes, smells, and thoughts act as the fuse for your practice. When the sense of consciousnesses begin to wear themselves out a little bit, you become slightly bored with them and turn to the subconscious mind. So I thought this was fascinating. He said that you're working with your conscious mind in the beginning. So you're practicing, you're following the technique, thoughts arise, they dissolve, you go back to your breath. But then he said, after a while, you get bored. And you just came back from a week-long meditation. So, I mean, I don't know if you experienced boredom, but Rinpoche used to talk about cool boredom. After a while, you're not that worried about what the types of thoughts are. Maybe you're more relaxed. And then suddenly, things get to be very boring, extremely boring. And so then, then the subconscious mind comes into play. And when we get bored during sitting practice, we start to replay conversations or events in our life. That's the subconscious mind, is where those thoughts dwell, where they live. So your usual storyline. Oh, when I was 6 years old, my teacher screamed at me, and so now I hate teachers, and that's why I'm so screwed up. And so as soon as you get bored, you start playing that audio or video tape. And he said, you may be comfortable and your environment safe and peaceful and all settled in, but when you dig up further excitement by looking into your personal relationships and emotional involvements with people, that's already you taking it to another level. So that's what meditators do, because it gets very boring. And so you feel like, well, what else is going on? So the subconscious mind provides you with storylines. And are people being nice to you or nasty? Rinpoche says, this is your subconscious mind. Maybe you remember a particular scene and experience the jealousy and passion you felt in that context. You might be planning your future. Like I remember when I first started meditating, my daughter was about 5 years old, or 4 years old, and she was going to New York to visit her dad. So I was so bored with the meditation. I mean, I could hardly sit an hour. I started planning her wardrobe about what I was going to pack for her when she goes to New York. And every time I went to our little center, I would just start visualizing the whole wardrobe. After a while, I was like, what am I doing here? Anyway, that's what happens. All thoughts should be experienced, and this is the important point. If I say that you should be aware, this is where Rinpoche makes an important point here. He said, all thoughts should be experienced. Thoughts should be experienced. And he says, if I say you should be aware of the thoughts, then you will find that you are becoming a slave of your own awareness. So he said, not to try to be aware of your thoughts, but just experience the thoughts. Then you start becoming too psychological. He said, you become a slave of your own awareness. That approach to practice does not work. It is too self-conscious. So I prefer the word experience thoughts rather than awareness of thoughts. And I thought that was really interesting because I think there's a big emphasis on being aware of thoughts now when people give instruction, or when you read books about meditation, be aware of your thoughts. But he said, experience your thoughts, but see, that goes along with space, because when you're in space, you experience the space, but you don't have to be aware of the space. Because once you're aware of the space, you become self-conscious. You're not relaxed anymore. The Buddha sat under the papala tree, just breathing. So Rinpoche said, breathing is an expression of being. For instance, when a person is passed out, you don't check. The first thing you do is you check to see if they're breathing. And if they're breathing, you know they're still alive. Like, I don't know if any of you have ever had a pet, but sometimes when your cat is sick or your dog is sick, and you think, oh, this is the end, and you wake up in the middle of the night, and they're just like lying there, and you think, oh, they're dead. But then you go over and you put your hand in front of their nose, and they're like breathing. So like, okay, they're still alive. So Rinpoche said that breath is an expression of being. For instance, when a person is passed out, you check whether they are dead or alive by feeling whether they are breathing or not. It's not about prana or life force. Early Buddhas were just breathing. So, now there's an emphasis on the prana, the life force, the energy running up and down the spine. No, you just breathe. Just sit there, your posture, and just breathe in the space. Just being there is the outcome of the breathing technique. For long-term sitting practice, it is advisable to start with the mindfulness breathing. Later, the awareness of the breathing falls away. And at that point, you just go along with it. That seems to be the best, most systematic approach. So in the beginning, you have to follow a technique. It's really important, because otherwise, you just get lost. You don't know what you're doing. But after a while, when you follow the technique of just sitting in the space with a good head and shoulders, a good strong back, and a soft chest open, your heart is open, sitting in the space, you work with the breath. The awareness is on the out-breath, leaving the space in front of you. The awareness is about 40% on the out-breath, and the rest is on the space. And then when you notice that you're thinking, you label the thought thinking in your mind, you say thinking, and you go back to the experiencing the space of the out-breath. The in-breath takes care of itself. When you begin to feel you ought to be doing something, you automatically present millions of obstacles to yourself. Both the breathing and formless meditation, one of the problems meditators experience is that there is a slight, almost subconscious guilty feeling that they ought to be doing something rather than just experiencing what goes on. So after a while you think, maybe I should be doing something else. Maybe this is just too simple. But the simplicity is what's magical about meditation practice. It's very simple. It's very direct. Just simply sit in the space. But if you can't relate to the simplicity, then you automatically present millions of obstacles to yourself. Meditation is not a project. It is a way of being. You could experience that you are what you are. Fundamentally sitting there and breathing is a very valid thing to do. Very valid. That's all it is. kind of wonder that it's so simple that people find it so difficult to do. The simplicity is just too much. Anyway, there's this Tibetan teacher that I never met called Otto Rinpoche. He lives in England, and he was a good friend of Trungpa Rinpoche's. And I heard that he married an English woman, and he never talked about being a Buddhist or meditation or anything. And his daughter would bring friends home, and he'd be sitting in front of his shrine, and she'd say, "That's my father, you know. He just, you know, he likes to meditate. I don't know what he's doing." We never talked about it. And then he worked in a mental institution as an orderly, and he would mop up. And because many Tibetans came here, you know, after the communist invasion. I mean, they could have been Rinpoches, or they could have been great gurus or great meditation masters, but they needed to get a job, and they really didn't have any credentials. So they did like meager jobs. So he was an orderly that would mop up in a mental institution, and whenever somebody started to have like a little fit or a little episode, they would say, "Oh, let's get Mr. Otto. He'll know what to do." And so they'd get Mr. Otto to come, and he would sit with the patient, and he would hold their hand, and he would just sit with them. And after a while, everything was fine, because he knew how to relax in space. He didn't have to manipulate anything. He understood space, and he could accommodate the person who was having the episode, the mental break, whatever it was. He could accommodate that. And people just knew that he could do it, but they didn't understand how he was doing it. He wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a nurse, he was just Mr. Otto the orderly. Anyway, okay, now, there's this very nice little song in the songbook. It's called Songs of Realization, and these songs were given to us by Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso Rinpoche. Here's a picture of him. Trungpa Rinpoche met him one time in Boulder in the early, I guess it was in the 70s, or maybe it was the early 80s. What happened was, one of Trungpa Rinpoche's students was Tibetan, called the court. The Rinpoche's household was called the court, and spoke to whoever answered the phone. He said, "I'd like to bring over a Tibetan teacher that's here, Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso Rinpoche, to meet Trungpa Rinpoche." And whoever answered the phone said, "I'm sorry, but Rinpoche's busy right now. He doesn't have time." So, I think it was John. What was the name of Rinpoche's, the Tibetan Rinpoche student who helped him with all the translations and everything? I forget his name. Anyway, he wasn't. That man brought Khenpo Tsultrim over anyway. Lama Shempen. Anyway, he rings the doorbell, and the two Tibetans have presented themselves. So there was nothing they could do. You know, the man, whoever was the Kasung that answered the door, brought him in, and Trungpa Rinpoche had a meeting with Khenpo for a few minutes. They just spoke, because Rinpoche was very busy, and they just spoke, and they met that one time. And when they left, the Rinpoche's Kasung said to him, "Oh, so what did you think, Rinpoche?" And he said, "Oh, a yogi and a teacher and a scholar And the Kasung said, "So is that good?" And he said, "Oh, that's very good." Because Khenpo was a yogi and a scholar. In any case, he taught for many years in the States and around the world, but now he sits in his little beautiful nunnery in Kathmandu with his beautiful nuns who take care of him. And if you want to see him, you have to go there. And Rinpoche, Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtse Rinpoche, taught many, many songs of realization by the great yogi Milarepa and other great yogis. But Milarepa spent most of his life in retreat. So I guess he knew something about meditation practice. But Trungpa Rinpoche said that Milarepa did not attain enlightenment in the cave. He attained enlightenment because people started coming to his cave to ask for teachings. And when he started teaching, then he attained enlightenment. He said it's very important to have students and to teach. It's just not about meditation. Teachers have to teach. So Milarepa got a chance to teach. Of course, he himself had a great teacher by the name of Marpa, the translator. And so he was very good. Anyway, here's a song called Guru Rinpoche Prayer. Now, Guru Rinpoche, right here you see a very nice tanka of Guru Rinpoche. Guru Rinpoche was predicted by the Shakyamuni Buddha, the Buddha of our time, to be the second Buddha. He was Indian, and he was invited to come to Tibet by King Trisen Dretsu. I don't know why I can never remember that name. Who was the king of Tibet, to tame the wild beings in Tibet. Because Tibet was a very, very wild country. And so in order to plant the victory banner of Buddhism in Tibet, it had to be tamed. So along comes Guru Rinpoche in all his 8 manifestations, and he knew how to work with energy, and he knew how to work with space. So this is a prayer for Guru Rinpoche, and I thought it would be nice to go over this because, in my opinion, this is the ground path and fruition of the Dharma of the Buddhist path. This song, and if Khenpo would have only taught us one song, and he only taught us this song, it would be the completion of what practice is. And it kind of goes along very nicely with mixing the mind with space. It's on page 6 of the songbook. What?
When you read this, it's, for instance, at the end of the first stanza, it says, Urgyen Pema Jumne, I supplicate. Urgyen was where he was born.
Okay, wait, John.
At the end of the first stanza, it says, to Urgyen Pema Jungne, I supplicate. Now, there are many names for Guru Rinpoche, and one of them is this one. Urgyen is the place where he was born. Nobody knows where it is exactly, but it was probably in what is now Afghanistan, in this valley called the Swat Valley, a very remarkable, romantic place. It was the western terminus of the silk routes that went across Central Asia, and there were many cultures there. And it also has the mountain that has the highest vertical rise in all the world, 20,000 feet from the base to the top, called Nanga Parbat. And anyhow, so Urgyen Pema Jungne refers to the fact that he was born at the age of 7, fully formed as a 7-year-old, on a lotus in the middle of a lake. And Pema means lotus, and Jungne means born from. So Urgyen, that's the place where he was born. Pema Jungne means born from a lotus. That's one of his names.
Thank you, John. Okay. So I will sing the first stanza, and then you can all join in. We'll start again, and we can all say the first sentence together. Guru Rinpoche prayer, a prayer that appearances be liberated as deity, that sounds be liberated as mantra, and that thoughts be liberated into pure being. All these forms that appear to eyes that see, all things on the outside and the inside, the environment and its inhabitants appear, but let them rest where no self's bound. Perceiver and perceived when purified are the body of the deity, clear emptiness to the Guru, for whom desire frees itself to organ pema yungne I supplicate. Okay, should we all start? All these forms that appear to eyes that see, all things on the outside and the inside, the environment and its inhabitants appear, but let them rest where no self's bound. Perceiver and perceived when purified are the body of the deity, clear emptiness to the Guru, for whom desire frees itself to organ pema yungne supplicate. All these sounds that appear for ears that hear, taken as agreeable or not, let them rest in the realm of sound and emptiness, past all thought, beyond imagination. Sounds are empty, unarisen and unceasing. These are what make up the victor's teaching. To the teaching of the victor, sound and emptiness, to organ pema yungne I supplicate. All these movements of mind towards its objects, these thoughts that make 5 poisons and afflictions, leave thinking mind to rest without contrivances. Do not review the past nor guess the future. If you let such movement rest in its own place, it liberates into the Dharma Kaya. To the Guru, for whom no awareness frees itself, to organ Pama Young I supplicate. Grant your blessing that purifies appearance of objects perceived as being outside. Grant your blessing that liberates perceiving mind, the mental operation seeming inside. Grant your blessing that between the two of these, clear light will come to recognize its own face. In your compassion, Sugatas of all three times, please bless me that a mind like mine be free. Okay. Any questions?
Could you talk a little bit more about boredom? Because my personal experience on a very superficial level, I think, was that I was addicted to stimulation. And so boredom was like, I'm not seeing a movie, nobody's entertaining me, there's nothing like that I was used to take my attention away from the present moment.
Is that when you were practicing in retreat?
This has been going on for a while. I think it passed before the retreat, but for me, it seemed like the experience was like quitting cigarettes, for example. Like after about 3 weeks of not watching TV, not reading the newspaper, not going to the movies, not, everything that I was missing started to look considerably more interesting. And I haven't had the same problem with boredom that I had before.
So how did you work with it?
Like sentient beings are unbelievably interesting. There's like no telling what they're going to do next. So the world around me is deeply fascinating in a way that I couldn't see before. But in meditation, it's still just me and my knees and the room and whatever sounds are happening, like rain or crickets or whatever. I wonder about your experience.
Well, it sounds like you handle it beautifully. You're practicing. That's the main thing. That's the thing, no matter what happens, we always can go back to the practice. We have a practice to go back to. That's it. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be boredom, it could be anxiety, it could be depression. There's always something that's going to come up. So, we just go back to what we've learned, how we've learned to work with our mind. We just go back to the practice. I think the most important thing is not to worry so much about what's going on out there, but to have an allegiance, a strong allegiance to sitting practice, and make a schedule for ourselves every day. You get up in the morning and you practice, or whenever you practice, because there's always going to be something that's going to distract us. And we live in the 21st century where there's so many distractions. But I mean, every century had distractions. The main distraction is that we don't really want to relate to ourselves. But problem is, for people here, or maybe people reading, like listening to the talk, is that once you have instruction and you've had a teacher give you meditation instruction or tell you about the Dharma, or you've read a Dharma book, if you've gone to hear a Dharma talk, the problem is, how do you get away from that? How do you just blend in your ordinary life and forget about what you've learned? So you can't really go back to that old way of being. You don't really, it just doesn't work. I don't know. So, I don't know, that's how you deal with it. You go back to your practice. Discipline.
I just want to share a kind of discovery that I had recently, which, it's turned out to be meaningful for me. I don't know about the others. But I am an extremely easily distracted person with not a lot of discipline. And it's been very difficult for me for practice not to become a should, because the should, I think almost a should of anything invokes the opposite. It's an invocation of the opposite. It's like hope and fear. It's the should is with resistance, goes hand to hand to resistance. And I finally got, just relatively recently, I got sick of it. I don't think I got sick of meditation. I got sick of my attitude and my absence of discipline. And then all of a sudden there was something that came to me, which was, instead of, thinking, well, I should do this and this, do this and so on, I said, well, what if I just let the practice do me rather than worry about me doing the practice? And that's been my most recent discovery, which with which I have started to become successful, because it allowed me to leave myself alone and allow the key word there, I think, is allowance. Allow the practice to do me.
Can you explain that a little further?
Well, it's just the notion of being there rather than all the extra stuff of, as I said, all the shoulds.
Being there in which way, though?
Just there, just simply there, just sitting down, and rather than the kind of rumination of, I'm doing this right, and what is this, and so on and so on.
But the thing is, you have to sit down.
I'm talking about making ourselves available.
Yeah, but you still have to sit down.
Oh, of course. No,
Yeah.
I'm talking about formal practice, only
yes.
about that. I'm not saying that, you go off into the woods. No. But the key word there is allowance, rather than, excuse the word, stooping ourselves all the time about we should or shouldn't be doing, or, finding distractions and,
Well, whatever it takes.
Pardon?
Whatever it takes.
Yeah. Well, I found, finally, it's only been 40 years, actually.
Okay.
So I don't know, I just wanted to share that. I don't know if that means anything. As I said, it's about allowing to happen what's going to, because otherwise there's a danger of trying to exercise control over yourself, where the notion of meditation is really totally the opposite.
Open, spacious, and relaxed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice talk, by the way. Very nice talk.
Thank you, Peter. It's good to see you. Anyone else?
I just wanted to compare thoughts with a restless child, because I have a child. She's under 2 years, and when I contemplate, she's she's never still. Even when she's watching a TV or a cartoon or something, when she must be, calm and still, she always wants to move her feet or her arms or her hands or anything. Like, she's never still. So, and then I thought that's how my mind was when I started to meditate, especially at retreat, when we had to sit like 8-10 hours a day at Westchester Buddhist Center, and my mind was just jumping around. And I remembered Elizabeth, that it's like her. And then I thought that, my daughter Elizabeth won't be like that the whole life, right? And I think that my mind won't be like that too. So I think that it takes time, and it needs a discipline. We teach our children to learn something, right? To get used to discipline. That's how we have to work with our mind too, like on a daily basis. And the next is that when it comes boredom, when you get used to do something on a regular basis, and then when you get bored, but then you have to make peace with that boredom, and then you go to the next or further level. But if you don't go through all those steps, you just always stay on the same level. So I just think that it's like raising your child is like the same as working on your mind and meditation practice.
Well, it's interesting when you watch children. They have so much energy and they're interested in everything. They don't find anything boring. Everything interests them. It's like they can read a book 10 times, the same book over and over and over again. They memorize the book. And they're not bored. Except when my daughter was growing up, her favorite phrase was, "Mommy, I'm so bored." Like, everything was so boring, because she always wanted, entertainment. And that would drive me crazy when she said that. Anyway, but the main thing to remember is, no matter what the environment is, whether it's an active mind where you can't relax, whether it's a bored mind where you're so bored, so your subconscious mind has to start playing the movie of your life. I'm so bored. Whatever it is, the practice is still the same. The practice is still in the space of open, spacious, and relaxed. It's just us that's, kind of like working with whatever energy comes up. And whatever the energy is, the space can accommodate it. Everything is workable. But I remember when my daughter was she was 3 when I started practicing, and I had a little shrine in the bedroom that was made out of a box with a white tablecloth on it and a little, just like a line drawing of the Buddha. That was the shrine. And I would get up in the morning and practice, and then she would get up and she would just sit in my lap. I never asked her to, because she always wanted to be with Mommy. So Mommy was sitting, she would sit in my lap, and we would just sit there together. And it was kind of nice.
For how long?
Whatever. We would just sit together, because I never asked her to. She would just come sit in my lap. Because children like to hang out with their parents. And whatever their parents are doing, they'll hang out with you doing that, especially when they're really little. So if they see you practicing, then they sit with you. And then I used to take her with me to talks at our little meditation center, that little Dharma study group that we belong to in Santa Cruz. And she would come with me to hear talks, and we would all be sitting, and there might be some other kids there, and they'd be playing or whatever. They'd come into the shrine room, It was like a space that was open to them, whatever they wanted. And then when we went to seminary when she was 9, she had friends that were a little bit older at seminary. They would come into the Hinayana and the Mahayana talks, and they would come in with their notebooks, and she would sit and take notes, because her friends were taking notes, because they were a little bit older. So she just kind of like blended into that space, which was seminary. And then we were taught oryoki, which is a formal Japanese kind of monastery way of eating with 3 bowls. And we were studying oryoki at the Shambhala was called Dharmadhatu then, Dharmadhatu. And when the seminarians came back from the 1980 seminary, oryoki was introduced. And so I would take her with me, because basically I took her wherever I went. And you remember that, Peter, right? So she learned how to eat oryoki, and I said, well, do you want me to buy you an oryoki set for seminary? And she said, yes. So I bought her an oryoki set, and she came into the shrine room after breakfast. We went into the shrine room for like 3 or 4 hours and learned how to eat oryoki. It was formal chanting, formal way of eating, bowing, like servers would come out with bowls. I mean, it was very intense. And Nicole had her own bowl, so she was very happy. And then she would taste the food, she says, this is disgusting. And then she would put the food into my bowl, and 350 people would look at me like this. Like, why are you bringing a child into the shrine room when this is like an important practice that we're trying to learn? And I just kind of like ignored them, because she was interested in this practice, and so I was going to just let her do it. And after a while, she stopped whining. After a while, she would just eat the food. After a while, she learned all the chants by heart and learned how to use the chopsticks and the spoons and everything perfectly. And then like in 2 weeks, Rinpoche, we were told that Rinpoche was coming in to the shrine room to have lunch with us. And we were all sitting in these big rows, facing each other. And then the front row was facing him. So I made sure that we sat in the front row so that we would face him. He was sitting on a throne. And he comes in with his beautiful lacquer oryoki set. And we're sitting there, and then you have the drums, and you have the instruments, the servers come out with the bowls, there was a rice bowl, a soup bowl, and then the main course, whatever it was, vegetables, and they'd walk around to all the rolls, and we would all bow to each other, and the server would serve. Have you ever seen this in oryoki?
I'm familiar with it, but I've never participated.
Yeah.
I'm going to be attending a retreat in a couple of weeks, actually, where we're going to be doing oryoki.
Oh, God. Okay. I wish you a lot of luck. Anyway, so then, after lunch, Rinpoche asked his secretary, Helen Green, who is the young lady sitting in the shrine room that knew all the chants by heart and could eat so beautifully? And she said, well, it had to be Nicole, Rochelle's daughter. So I go up there that afternoon because I had a kasung shift. And he grabs a hold of me, in this beautiful hotel we were in Lake Louise in Canada, on the west coast, near Banff. And he said, Rochelle, was that your daughter eating oryoki? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, how did she learn that? So, because a light bulb went off in his head that oryoki was a great practice for kids. Because when he gave us that practice, he didn't think about the children, but when he saw a 9-year-old eating oryoki, he's like, wow, this is a great discipline for children. And I told him, that she wanted her set because we were practicing in New York. And he said, when you go back to New York, I want you to teach all the children oryoki. So I was like, okay. I didn't think much of it, but when a child is interested in something, in a Dharma situation, then you encourage that. You encourage whatever the child wants, because that's encouraging them to work with their body, speech, and mind in a different way. So as a parent, bring her to situations where there are other Dharma the children that she can be with, and be with Sangha, and that will, I think, have a great effect on her. Mr. Baker?
Your child is a little young, and Trungpa Rinpoche felt that children shouldn't be taught meditation until they're about 9, to the age that Rochelle's talking about with Nicole, that the ego has to fully form before you begin to unravel it with meditation practice. So there are practices that are done in the centers for very small kids, but they're more like play, where they encourage the child to sort of come present. Things like working with, those things that have snowflakes and you turn them upside down and they settle, and the child watches the settling, and their attention is focused for a little while instead of jumping all around, perhaps. But on the whole, you certainly don't work with any discipline with a child your age. There might be some kind of element of imitation. If they see someone like a parent doing oryoki, they might want to play with the objects. But again, until they're 9 or so, around in there, depending on the child, you don't want to start teaching them awareness practice, which is what oryoki fundamentally is. It's a discipline.
What kind of practice?
Awareness. Also, in this regard, Trungpa Rinpoche discriminated between 2 kinds of boredom, what he called hot boredom and cool boredom. Hot boredom is what most people experience when they are beginning to meditate or in the beginning stages of meditation. And what it is a feeling of heat, of unpleasantness. And it's because our thoughts are like little mini movies, that we go to the theater to watch, or television shows or novels, and they are full of, anxiety and resolution and, self-improvement and goal orientation and will the hero win out and so forth. And they're very entertaining in that way if they're irritating in their repetitive quality. And when we sit with them and they repeat over and over again, we experience what he called hot boredom, which is very irritating. And then he said, you have to get to the point of cool boredom. And what cool boredom is when you begin to actually accept your mind and not complain about it, and not try and get away from it and change it, but you become familiar with it. You become, you let it come and you let it go, and you're not struggling with it. And then it becomes cool. And he said, like a brook, that's running, or a stream that's tumbling over rocks as it runs down. And that's an important thing to do. It often happens in retreat, or such as what Tim went and experienced, where you just sort of give in to being with your own mind after a while, and it becomes more relaxing. It's still boring, but it's cool rather than heated and irritating.
Thanks, John.
I really appreciated that metaphor of my mind as a child, because I think it speaks very much to an idea of patience and commitment. So even if I have some kind of intellectual idea of how I would like my mind to be if I practice for a period of time, your child could be difficult during a certain period because it's teething, and nobody likes to experience pain, or like the terrible twos or the ego formation that John's talking about. And no matter how you feel about that, there's no possibility of making your child suddenly be 2 years older. But if you continue to feed the child, wash the child, and make sure it gets enough sleep, it will turn into an adult inexorably. It's not possible to avoid it. So I like the idea that even though my mind is not what it might someday be, even if I don't know what that is, if I continue to do the practice, it will happen. but there's no way for me to rush it, and so therefore there's no need for me to try to rush it. That's a waste of effort.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, because everything we see in life, we look at people, we look at animals, we look at nature, it's always a reminder of how we can work with that energy, how we reflect that energy as us. You know, this is always, the reminders are everywhere. Anything else? Thank you, yeah. Excellent. Anyone else? Okay, so I think that's it. If people would like to take a picture of this Guru Rinpoche prayer with their camera, their phone, then you can have it. So we dedicate the merit. By this merit may all obtain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the rigged in wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, everyone.